The Mythos of Milos. Of course it is raining. It has rained almost every day since he died. 5 days in a row. Or is it 6 now? Yes, 6 days of rain. He's been dead for a week. The drops falling to the ground on the first day were just our tears. Then the heavens joined in, weeping the loss of such a great man. For the end of the finest circus in the land, for the laughter that had ceased, for the joy that would never be, for the orphan that was once again. I have been with Romansky's traveling circus for 20 years as we traveled across Czechoslovakia. I grew to love Milos like a father, as much as a bird can have a human father. During the war, they trained me to deliver messages among the generals. I wasn't a pigeon, which made my disguise perfect. Who would suspect a goldfinch? Milos was a general in the Czech army, and I always delivered my messages to him. He would save small pieces of pastry for me as payment for my services. Soon, he realized I wasn't just delivering messages, I was also creating them. That's right, I have a gift. I can communicate with humans. Not like some idiot dog wagging a tail and begging for a biscuit. I'm talking legitimate two-way communication. Some call it telepathy. Unfortunately, many more called it lunacy, and they discharged Milos from the army because of impaired mental health. Of course, no one told me. I had to learn it one day when I delivered a message and found a new general sitting at his desk. Some fool who could not understand what I was saying. He threw a rock at me and I immediately resigned from duty. I found him 2 weeks later laying on the side of the street, passed out drunk. Not even half the man I knew. His legs were covered in brown, putrid mud from the river. I stayed with him all night and kept the rats and raccoons at bay. The next morning, he was so happy to see me, and I him. We talked for hours until the sun shone high over the river. It shocked him to learn that other animals could communicate like I could. I never really thought much about it. Do you ever consider why you can talk to someone? You just do it. I mentioned some animals I could talk to, including a rhinoceros at the zoo. His ears perked up at that one. We stuck together for a few months while he tried to figure out what this chapter of life had in store for him. One thing I noticed was his guilt over the war. Year upon year of death and destruction had turned him into a meek version of his former self. Adults shunned and mocked him. Milos, the great general who helped secure their freedom. They spat on him, threw things at him, but never once did he fight back. He had lost the will as we won the war. One time, the attacks were particularly bad and Milos was bleeding from his head. I lost control of myself and flew at the men, pecking their heads and going for the eyes. 2 fat kids on the sidewalk saw it and pointed, laughing so hard they fell backwards onto the ground. "Look at that guy's pet bird beating them up," they jeered. The men fled down the street, hands clutching the brim of their hats, pulled low over their heads in a defensive posture. "Mister, what else can your pet bird do?" asked the taller of the children. Milos picked himself up off the ground and swatted the dust from his jacket. He adjusted his tie and stood taller than he had in months. "That depends, lads. What would you like to see?" "Can he bring us each a piece of candy from the store down the street?" they said, eager to see what would happen. Milos looked at me and winked. He raised his hands and pointed at my chest, made some wild gesticulations, and screamed, "At once!" Somehow I managed to keep my composure and not let on how ridiculous he looked. But this was as animated and happy as I had seen him in a year. I flew in small circles around his waist and then bolted for the general store at the end of the lane. 10 seconds later, I dropped a piece of candy into the taller child's outstretched hand. "Wow, that's amazing. Wait until I tell the other kids about this. They won't believe it," he said as he popped the candy in his mouth and ran down the road. I felt bad for the remaining child, so I made another trip and dropped a caramel candy in his hand too. Before long, we had every child in town watching our performance. Milos skipped in circles, pointing this way and that. I flew patterns that would have even impressed the Royal Air Force. The kids roared their approval, all except one. "Milos," I said, "that small girl hasn't clapped a single time. The thin one with black hair standing in the back." He nodded and walked over to her. They talked for several minutes, but I couldn't hear the conversation. He sat down and embraced her with a soft, one-armed hug. I remember she shook her head no, and he reached into his jacket, removing a piece of bread wrapped in paper. She ate it faster than I thought humans could eat. I even think a piece of the paper was missing once she finished chewing. Milos looked at me and pointed at the girl. He reached out and held her tiny hand in his, extending her index finger out like she was pointing the way. I flew over and landed on her finger. Our eyes locked together, and I began to sing. Gentle at first, soft chirps and tones to gauge her response. As her smile broadened, my volume increased until I was chirping for all I was worth. Let me tell you, birds can get short of breath too. "Mister, don't waste your bird on her. She hasn't talked in months since the day a bomb killed her parents. I don't think she even knows how to be happy. Milos glared at the boy who had uttered the words. Let me tell you, we all know how to be happy. The question is whether life allows us the opportunity to experience it. He looked at me. Now I know what we must do. Go find the other animals and meet me at the carriage maker. We must bring joy to children affected by the war. They deserve happiness. Milos picked the girl up and held her on his hip. He spun around so all the kids could see the twinkle in his eye as he held aloft his new friend. Happiness renewed his soul as he spoke these words. My dear girl, have you ever ridden a rhinoceros?